L'ordine del giorno.
Next on our agenda, we come to the debate on the future of Europe with Leo Varadkar, the Taoiseach of Ireland. As you will be aware, this is the first debate on the future of Europe that the European Parliament has decided to organise, to which we will be inviting Prime Ministers and other leading players in European life, so that we can have a palpable exchange of views, not just listening to formal niceties, but getting to know each other's thoughts and proposals, hearing what the European leaders have to propose to us. So I'm grateful to the Taoiseach of Ireland for having responded in a very meaningful way to our response. He will be the first to speak under this new formula. We'll be listening to him with great interest, amongst other reasons because Ireland is a leading player in the new phase of European life. So having him here with us in the chamber of the European Parliament is very significant. So I'm grateful to him for being the first to respond to our request and making himself available to us for this opportunity to hold an exchange of views with the European Parliament. So I'm now delighted to give the floor to Mr. Varadkar so that he can address you and make a start to this constructive debate on the future of Europe.
Thank you very much. President Tajani, Vice Presidents, President Juncker, Commissioner Hogan, distinguished leaders of the political groups, members of the European Parliament, dear friends. I want to say that it is a really great privilege to be the first speaker in your series of debates with heads of government on the future of the European Union. Mr. President, I believe that the European Union is at a decisive point now in our history. Despite all of the upheavals in recent years, the rise of populism and Euroscepticism, nationalism, anti-democratic forces, we meet today in solidarity and with a renewed sense of purpose. The European ideal has always been inspired by a spirit of optimism and a belief in a better future. And while that ideal has been tested, it hasn't been broken. And based on the achievements of the past, we have a renewed appetite to face the challenges of the future. Back in 1947, representatives from 16 countries met in Paris to discuss how, in the words of Jean Monnet, they could resist economic decline and preserve political freedom. En 1947, des représentants de 16 pays sont réunis à Paris pour discuter la manière dont, selon les termes de Jean Monnet, ils pourraient résister au déclin économique et préserver la liberté politique. L'Irlande était l'un de ces 16 pays. La sagesse de la prédiction de Monnet, selon laquelle il n'y a pas à devenir pour les peuples d'Europe autre dans l'Union, c'est vite fait jour. Dès le début, les petits pays ont contribué de manière non négligeable au développement de l'Europe. Et dans les années 50, Joseph Beck, luxembourgeois et grand architecte d'intégration, a joué un rôle capital dans la création de la communauté européenne du charbon et de l'acier et dans la tenue de la conférence de Messine en Sicile. Interrogé sur la présence des politiciens européens réunis en Sicile en 1955, un haut dirigeant politique britannique rétorqua que ces derniers avaient pris part aux fouilles archéologiques, des fouilles qui ont servi de base au traité de Rome. Wir sehen die Stärke der europäischen Wertvorstellung in Europa der Persönlichkeiten wie Konrad Adenauer und Hans-Dietrich Genscher, deren Vision für Versöhnung und Integration in ganz Europa so wichtig war. Wir sehen sie in Arbeit Helmut Kohls und seinen Glauben, die Bedürfnisse und Gleichberechtigung kleiner Nationen zu beachten. Und wir sehen sie in der Vision Jacques Delors und seinem Glauben an einen tieferen Sinn Europas, ein Seele für Europa, ohne den das ganze Projekt scheitern würde. Seine Arbeit der Schaffung einer gemeinsamen Währung, den Euro, ist ein bedeutsames Erbe. Seine Aufgabe an uns, einen größeren Sinn auszutreiben, ist noch bedeutsamer. Mr. President, dear friends, the promise of a better future has motivated people to work for the European ideal since the very beginning. And speaking in this chamber today, I'm reminded of one of the greatest figures in Irish politics, and indeed one of the greatest figures in politics from Northern Ireland, John Hume, whose birthday it is tomorrow, and who served as a member of this great Parliament for 25 years. John Hume spoke many times about the symbolism of the bridge not too far from here, connecting Strasbourg to Kehl, just across the border in Germany. He spoke how easy and ordinary it was to walk across that bridge, and given Europe's dark history, how remarkable and profound that ordinariness was. In the European Union, John Hume saw a model and a vision for how a lasting peace, however improbable, could be fostered and built. And he saw how that model of people working together with a shared purpose and endeavour, spilling their sweat instead of their blood, as he put it, could provide an inspiration for my own country. Today, there is a peace bridge crossing the River Foyle, bringing together the divided communities in John's native city of Derry in Northern Ireland, a bridge that the European Union helped to build. Dear friends, it's hard to imagine the Good Friday Agreement being made without our shared membership of the European Union and its single market. And in Ireland, we are now having to contemplate our future without that foundation which underpinned it and made it possible. That's why the government which I lead has been so determined to protect the Good Friday Agreement in all its parts and all that flows from it. And it's why we've insisted that there cannot be a return to a hard border on our island, no new barriers to the movement of people or to trade. And it's why we're so deeply grateful for the remarkable solidarity and support from other member states. It is everything we hoped for and proof positive of why small countries benefit so much from membership of this union. And so the Irish people are profoundly grateful for the unswerving support of this Parliament. And in particular, I want to thank your President, Antonio Tajani, your Brexit coordinator, Guy Verhofstadt, the leader of the EPP group, Manfred Weber, and all of the other political groups that have been so supportive. The solidarity of the Parliament has been matched by the Commission and the Council. And I'd also like to extend my thanks to President Juncker, to the lead Commission negotiator, Michel Barnier, and also to Council President Donald Tusk. The European Union has consistently recognised the unique position of Northern Ireland and the unique situation in which it finds itself given the decision of the United Kingdom to leave the European Union, a decision which, of course, we respect. Notwithstanding that, the majority of people in Northern Ireland voted to remain in the European Union. The majority of the representatives elected to the Northern Ireland Assembly want to remain in the customs union and the single market. And it's likely that the majority of people living in Northern Ireland will remain European citizens after Brexit because of their unique status under the Good Friday Agreement, which allows them to be British citizens, Irish citizens, or both. The breakthrough achieved before Christmas means that the United Kingdom has guaranteed that whatever the future relationship with the European Union is, a hard border on the island will be avoided, and the common travel area and all the associated rights that flow from it will be maintained. As the negotiations move forward, into phase two, we'll continue to rely on your support and solidarity as we work to ensure that what has been promised in theory is delivered in practice, and there can be no backsliding on this. So it's important that these commitments are fully reflected in the legal text of the withdrawal agreement and firmly embedded in the UK's future relationship with the European Union, whatever shape that ultimately takes place. And for my part, I hope that the new relationship that exists between the United Kingdom and the European Union is as close and as deep as is possible, but consistent with the need of the Union to protect our internal market and customs union. Mr. President, I was born European and am part of a new generation of political leaders who were born after our countries joined the European Union or its predecessors. We treasure what has been achieved and share the vision of the founders for further integration and cooperation. While I've always lived with the benefits of European membership, I've never taken them for granted. I very much value what was hard won by past generations and what they sacrificed for us. That vision delivered peace in Europe and opened the door to peace and prosperity in my own country. These values of solidarity, partnership, cooperation, which are central to the European project, have brought Ireland from the position of being one of the least developed member states when we joined the Union to one of the most prosperous today. And for us, Europe enabled our transformation from being a country on the periphery to an island at the centre of the world, at the heart of this common European home which we helped to build. The promise of Europe unlocked the potential of Ireland, and it allowed us to take our place among the nations of the world. So along with other member states who've benefited so much from the European Union, I believe we have a particular responsibility now to lead on the future of Europe debate. We have much to offer and also much to give, and I firmly believe it is our responsibility and relish the opportunity. So I think we should approach, all of us, the debate on the future of Europe with a positive attitude, talking about what we want to achieve for our citizens rather than what we want to block or resist. Many of the policy challenges we face are increasingly global, and they cannot be met by nation states acting alone. Issues such as uncontrolled mass migration, climate change, cybersecurity, international trade, the regulation of medicines and major corporations, many of whom are now bigger than states, cannot be solved by 28 countries coming up with 28 different solutions. In unity, there is security. In cooperation, there is strength. As we say in the Irish language, Níneart gur le céile, there's no strength without being together. So we should, I believe, welcome those who aspire to and who are ready to take on the responsibilities and obligations of membership. The prospect of membership of the European Union can be a powerful motivator for those who seek to build peace and freedom and prosperity and democracy in the Western Balkans. And these countries, I believe, should be given a pathway to membership. Mr. President, I believe that in the Europe of the future, all European countries and all member states will be small states, even though perhaps they don't realise it yet. And you only need to look at the list of the top 60 cities in the world in terms of population. Only one of the top 60 is in the European Union, and it's currently getting ready to leave. And in terms of population now, there is only one country in Europe that's in the top 20 in the world, and its population is falling. So in a global context, we are very much now a union of small countries. And I know the population doesn't equate to economic power or military strength, but there can be no doubt that these are also shifting east and south globally. So I think we need to stick together if we're to protect what we have and continue to export our values and worldview. A Europe worth building is a Europe worth defending. And with the launch of PESCO in December, which Ireland was pleased to join, we are coming together to answer new threats in an inclusive way. The threats we face in the 21st century include cyber terrorism, international terrorism, uncontrolled mass migration, natural disasters, drug and human trafficking. And we want to be involved in European actions against all of these. We definitely can't do it on our own. My country also has a very proud history of military neutrality, participating in UN peacekeeping operations and EU common security and defence policy operations, and we are not members of NATO. So we will participate in PESCO in a way that is consistent with those traditions, as other countries will too. President, I believe the Europe of the future must do 4 things. First of all, we should continue to do what we currently do well. Secondly, we should focus on the big new challenges facing Europe and its citizens. Third, where appropriate, we should devolve some powers back to member states, municipalities and regions. And fourthly, we should engage more with citizens in direct democracy. Ireland, as you know, has moved from being a net beneficiary of the EU budget to one that is now a net contributor. Nonetheless, we're open to contributing more, but only if it's spent on things that contribute to the advancement of the European deal and the European project. For example, structural funds for Central and Eastern Europe to enable them to unlock their economic potential as we did. The European Union should also continue to fund well programmes and policies that work and have stood the test of time, such as the Common Agricultural Policy, and providing funding for research, innovation, Erasmus, Interreg, and the European Investment Bank, among others. Budgets for these, in my view, should be protected. Europe can do new things, and Europe should do new things. But new programmes require new money. Ireland is a founder member of the Euro and a founder member of the single market, and we were among the first to open our labour market to Europeans from Central and Eastern Europe. We now want to see the completion of the single market and the digital single market, and above all, a single market that serves the interests of all our citizens and not just corporations. So I want to commend this Parliament on the work it has done to make the lives of Europeans better by removing roaming charges on mobile phones within the European Union. That helps bring people together. Your recent action on credit card charges. And likewise, I commend the way you've championed air passenger rights and your plans for Interrail. Now is the time to fulfil the promise of the single market in other areas. For example, take financial services, insurance, mortgages, loans, so that people can get cheaper loans from European lenders and insurers if needs be. And I'd ask the Parliament to work on this in the period ahead, and I think it's something that would very much be welcomed by our citizens. I also believe we should work much more closely on the cost of medicines, and new innovative medicines in particular. This could save billions for taxpayers, freeing up funding to ensure that modern medicines are available to patients at the same time in every country, and countries are not played off against each other. So let's pool the buying power of 450 million people to do so. I also believe in more free trade agreements with third countries and in completing monetary union. And I believe in a banking union to protect citizens' savings on a pan-European basis and reduce exposure to individual member states. And I also think that a capital markets union would provide the building blocks for an integrated capital market across Europe. In terms of improving democracy within the EU, I support a Europe-wide list for the European Parliament. I'd like to get people in cafes in Naples and restaurants in Galway talking about the same election choices. Perhaps that's an ambitious idea, but I think it's one we should strive for. And I believe we should also make permanent the Spitzenkandidat system and democratise the choosing of candidates for other leading positions within the EU. And let's establish as well a common asylum policy and system to replace the current system, which we all know is not working. Too few countries have shouldered the responsibility of providing refugees with a fresh start in Europe. We can all do more, and we must. And let's put fire back into the engine of our social Europe by following through on the proclamation that we issued in Gothenburg last year on jobs, employment rights and pensions, among other things. Whatever our future holds, Europe needs to be competitive economically. And one of the ways to ensure this is by allowing competition among member states. And I think this is particularly important for peripheral and less developed countries whose domestic markets are small and need inward investment. My strong view is that national taxes that fund national budgets should be determined by national parliaments and governments. But equally strong is my view that corporations should pay their fair share of tax, and we cannot tolerate a situation where large companies avoid paying any taxes anywhere. And that's true for American tech companies, as it is true for European car manufacturers and international aerospace and defence companies. Ireland has already taken steps to close loopholes in our tax laws, and we'll do more in the years ahead. But we strongly believe this should be done on an international basis through the OECD, as Europe should not give advantages to our competitors on other continents by acting unilaterally. Mr. President, as a community, we must also look outwards, offering leadership and partnership, especially when it comes to Africa, a continent which is only 8 kilometres from Europe. And I believe that Europe must show much greater leadership on Africa, and I support the idea of an EU Marshall Plan for that continent. We've already witnessed the terrible impact that chaos in Syria and Lebanon has had on people in those countries and its impact on Europe. Libya and Syria are small countries. Imagine what would happen if similar events were to unfold in massive countries with massive populations like Egypt or Nigeria. The consequences are too awful to contemplate for us and for them. By contrast, we can look east to Asia and the successful development of those countries in East Asia who have transformed themselves from countries to which we gave aid to countries with which we now trade. So in the 21st century, Africa must succeed. It's in our interest and it's in theirs. So let's make it part of our mission as Europeans. I also strongly support the subsidiarity and proportionality task force. It's interesting to me and for many of us who travel the world that on many matters and many issues, US states and Canadian provinces and even counties and municipalities have greater autonomy and greater variation among themselves than EU member states currently have. So do we have the balance right? Not always. And does everything have to be harmonised and standardised? I don't think so. So, Mr. President, in making decisions, I think it's vital that our citizens are engaged. In Ireland, we've launched a national debate, a citizens' dialogue on Europe, and our starting point is to focus on the hopes and dreams of our citizens. Led by our Minister for Europe, we're undertaking a series of regional meetings and other initiatives across the country between now and Europe Day on the 9th of May. And I strongly encourage other countries to do the same. President, it's been an honour, a great honour, to be the first European head of state or government to speak to the European Parliament on this hugely important topic of the future of Europe. All of you, across all political groupings, have enormous political experience, insight and knowledge. There is a mass of wisdom in this chamber, and also imagination. And I believe it's the perfect place to debate our future as we move forward and to ensure that into the future that parliaments and governments are more connected to each other. I know that under the guidance of President Tajani, you've already started to discuss the issues in a thoughtful and productive manner. And even before the Commission's white paper, you adopted 3 resolutions on our future. I hope that this first debate in this series and the others to follow will be lively and spontaneous, and I look forward to engaging with you during the course of this session. The European Union has always offered the promise of a better future. It is a future that will not be handed to us. We must work to create it. We can achieve a more perfect union, and we can speak to Europe's soul. Our values like peace, friendship, freedom, justice, opportunity and cooperation are the values we're committed to in advancing in Ireland, on the island of Ireland, within our European family and in our relations in the wider world. Europe has been a great success, and we owe its achievements, peace, individual rights, equality before the law, prosperity, to that political creativity and the friendship that we've built together. I believe that Europe is the outcome of one of the greatest acts of political creativity in human history, and that same creativity and vision of the founders should drive our work today. The European ideal took flight in the second part of the 20th century, when people imagined a world joined by mutual interest, trust and affection, replacing one that was torn apart by jealousy, fear and animosity. Building on the great successes and achievements of the past, I believe that with our imagination, with creativity, with courage, we can provide a soul and a heart for Europe, creating opportunities for all of our citizens. And we can ensure that the European ideal that took flight in the last century will soar in the 21st. Mr. President, I want to conclude with a few words in the first official language of my country. Credum gurvi an spirid yerfach, agus credim adauchi, níos far bacush le hinspirid an ideal orpig agoni. American Europe, near churu, ardir, san oiriv a mask náisiún na crinne. Tom and buich, de vals dot orpig, agus new partiach, agus an ara, a hug she doing, the ling co to Brexit. Devnian sin an fá, a ayan chorha bioga torva, as an malricht den ei. Inish, ta an deshagoing, Europe na tauchi a haulu. Agus bawahlam lanun tarai glesh, an dul con kinatá a yen of agoing. Agus stiru na duhlain mora, nua atá I gest. Bawahlam gemeg parchnius genivi, eg sarani, in ein lahas dirach. Agus tosulagum galeroin an Europe nias mo tror, fui cursi na Africa. Takiam lesh an swiniv, Mother le Marshall Plan don Afric. Agus widjana ag cur le rahulach, na leihananta atá hart. Credum le saulíocht agus le mishnach, gememi denaun anam agus crí a cur fáil don Europe. Agus deisina a chruthú dar saránig galéir. Gur mí agat, and thank you very much.
Taoiseach, thank you very much for your speech. The large majority of the European Parliament is happy. Now it's very important for us to know that the first reaction by the President of the European Commission, Mr. Jean-Claude Juncker. Jean-Claude, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Taoiseach, ladies and gentlemen, to be very short, I couldn't more agree. That as Mr. Farage is. But I have to deliver a speech because the disappointment would be too big if I wouldn't do so. I'm delighted, that's what I wanted to say, that I'm delighted that my good friend Leo comes before this House today. And I would like to thank President Tajani and the Parliament for holding this timely debate on the future of our Union. This is the first of the kind and the first of many, I hope. Since he became Prime Minister, Leo has proven to be a committed European. I knew it before, but he has proven it now, being where he is for the time being. It is fitting that today we remember with sadness another true Irish and European statesman. I would like to pay my personal tribute to Peter Sutherland. He was the first ever Commissioner to receive the gold medal from this House. I was deeply saddened to hear of his passing. Peter Sutherland was a proud Irishman, another giant of European politics and a friend of so many. He will be missed, but his legacy lives on. As Peter in the past shaped our policies of today, so can we shape the policies of the future with the choices we make today. It was less than a year ago that I presented to you the white paper on the future of Europe, 5 possible scenarios for our project. Since then, the debate has picked up in all corners of Europe. The white paper set a new approach: debate, not dictate. And the white paper and the different scenarios are still inspiring the debate across Europe. However, the future of Europe cannot remain a scenario. The time to take decisions is now, because citizens will head to the polls in May 2019, and in doing so, they should have a clear understanding of how the European Union will develop over the years to come. Last September, I therefore presented to you my very own vision for a more united, stronger and more democratic union. A union where solidarity and responsibility go hand in hand in all policy areas, from migration to the banking and monetary union, from energy to our common budget. A union where the rule of law is not optional, but the very basis of everything we do, from implementing decisions jointly taken to preparing enlargements. A union of equals, where the euro and Schengen, the most visible expressions of European integration, continue to unite our continent. Since the publication of the white paper, a lot has happened. The Commission has organised hundreds of citizens' dialogues, important, 6 of them in Ireland, and I'm happy to see that the Taoiseach himself has launched citizens' dialogues on the future of Europe across Ireland, from Galway to Dublin. This is how it should be. To succeed in Europe, we have to put an end to this eternal artificial opposition between the Union and its member states. Our Union can only be built with our member states, never against them. And this is why your invitation of national leaders to this House, President Tajani, is so important. I'm delighted to see the commitment from the European Council. It has agreed the leaders' agenda, 17 summits in the next 18 months on the road to Sibiu, Hermannstadt, to chart our common future. This is even more than we had at the height of the Eurozone crisis. But with one important difference. This time, we are not repairing the burning plane while flying, as we had to do it during the crisis. Instead, we are now fixing the roof of our European house while the sun is shining. We know what we need to do together: completing our economic and monetary union, securing our borders, delivering on our social agenda, making our tax system fairer, reforming our asylum system, getting back to Schengen, and completing the digital market and the energy union. In all these talks on Europe's future, I have been privileged to have a close working relationship with the Taoiseach. And there is no better example than we worked during the first phase of negotiations with the United Kingdom. When it comes to the issue of Ireland in these negotiations, Europe is united. It is all for one and one for all. The Commission and the Irish government worked tirelessly, side by side, to help us reach the sufficient progress needed to move on to the next phase of the talks. This partnership will continue, and this partnership will grow stronger as we work on the future of our Union at 27. I read with pleasure Leo's speech at Citizens' Dialogue last November, when he set out his vision for, I'm quoting, a Europe that continues to do well what it does well, that focuses on big things and that, where appropriate, devolves some powers back to member states, municipalities and regions. For me, this is more than just a beautiful poem. These are the essential questions we all need to answer when going into the negotiations for the next European budget. This debate on the budget will be an open and honest discussion, and one that goes right to the heart of the debate of the future of the European Union. If we want the European Union to be more than a single market, nothing not more than a single market, then a single small budget will be sufficient. But if we want a European border and coast guard to protect our external borders, or European civil protection teams to help in case of floods or fires, then the answer is simple. Member States must put their money where their mouths are. Only one. Sehr verehrter Herr Präsident, genau weil diese Zukunft.
President, precisely because all of these future issues now need to be tackled, we have proposed that under the leadership of Vice President Timmermans, there will be a task force on subsidiarity and proportionality. In the next electoral campaign, then this will not much will change. Very few have the courage to stand at mass rallies, to stand up on a public square and defend European politics and policies. Everybody just goes to the people and says Europe is doing too much, but there are areas where Europe has to do more. And I've mentioned some of those. There are other areas, however, where we do need to withdraw, where there is too little added value. And other efforts which do not actually achieve anything, where our efforts do not fulfill objectives that could be achieved at any time in the near future. Now, I'm told that the European Parliament will not take part in the task force. I think that that is a crass mistake. We need the European Parliament when we're talking about what competences should be or could be sent back to the member states. Then of course this is a key debate, and of course we need to see what we can do better. We might talk about new competences as well, but our homework is to try and get some order into the whole mess of competences between member states and the EU. We need to have a proper re-evaluation of the current situation, because that is not in the interests of the European Parliament or the European Commission or the representatives of the member states. The European Parliament cannot allow us to deal with this alone.
Since 1999, the Good Friday Agreement has preserved peace and enabled progress where there once was bloodshed and discord. We all know that peace can be fragile, and I see no more important use of our new budget than guaranteeing and financing the peace process in Ireland. This is an unconditional European commitment. This is what the Commission will deliver with our proposal for the next multi-annual financial framework in May. Our new budget must be as ambitious as the goals we set ourselves and as flexible as possible to adapt to new and unforeseen challenges. Our future cannot wait. Together with Leo, with the Irish and with others, we'll swim in that direction. Thank you.
Grazie, Jean-Claude.
Thank you, Jean-Claude. I don't believe we were mistaken. I did in Parliament not to take part in a working group under the auspices of the European Commission, where 3 members would have been present together with officials carrying out study. We agree that there's a need for better legislation to reduce the bulk of rules. But I would remind you that the treaties make Parliament the primary institution of the European Union. It can't be dealt with as some sort of advisory body just sending along 3 members to a working party. It's a question of respect for the treaties, not just institutional dignity. There's no spirit of acrimony towards the Commission. Far from it. We want to work together closely with the Commission. But the Conference of Presidents unanimously decided, with the assent of all the groups, that we would not take part. That doesn't mean that we do not intend to work together with the Commission in ensuring we have better legislation and work for the benefit of our citizens. That's part of the debate too. At this point, we will take contributions from the political group leaders. Please do respect the speaking time you've been assigned. Following this round of group leaders, we will have a response from the Taoiseach, and then we will have a catch the eye session followed by another response from the Taoiseach. But as we have voting at 12:15, please do respect your speaking time. Manfred Weber, first of all, on behalf of the European People's Party Group.
Dear Taoiseach, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it was a good decision to ask Leo Varadkar, the Irish Prime Minister, to do the start of our Future of Europe debate in the European Parliament. It was a great speech, a great contribution to our debate. And I think we can, first of all, take out of this speech that it is good to follow the Irish example. Because when I look to the last years, then the Irish politicians, Anna Kenny, Leo Varadkar, didn't point the finger to others when it's about to take over responsibility, clean up the budget and do the necessary reforms. They simply did their job. The Irish government showed also in the last days how big, how strong you can be if you are part of the European Union. It's Brexit negotiations, another example where the Irish point is a good point. And finally, I must say that the tradition of referendums in Ireland helps a lot to explain people what is Europe all about. So this not blaming and shaming of Brussels, explaining what is going on in Brussels, explaining what is going on in Strasbourg, that is great. There are a few aspects I would see when I look to Ireland and the future of Europe. But now Europe stands at a crossroad between hate and hope. Demagogues play with the people's fears, and for their selfish goals, they are spreading hate. That is our challenge. We have to bring hope to the people. We know that the Europeans don't want to live in anger. They are proud of their European culture, of their achievements, and they want to protect the European way of life. They want to combine prosperity with fairness. They want to combine freedom with security and cultural identity with tolerance. That is what Europe is all about. And when we have this in mind, I think we have to make it concrete, what Leo also did in his speech. To talk about security for jobs, about social fairness, about quality of life. And the promise, can we protect this in a globalized world? This promise has to be founded now. We have to give good arguments to this. It's either a Europe which is fair or not a Europe at all. Furthermore, we see in times of Putin and IS that the people are looking for protection, for security. That's why your statement on the future of the European defence is a great statement. I myself, I was a few months ago in Estonia, and I visited the NATO air base there. A Belgian pilot told me what he is doing with the air policing towards the Russian border. And I asked him, would it be a problem for you if on your uniform there is not anymore the Belgian flag? What would he say when there will be the European flag in the future? And this young pilot told me, for me, it makes no difference. For me, it was always clear that I defend our European values when I am in my aircraft. Dear colleagues, it's either a Europe that is strong in defence or it's not a Europe at all. And finally, about culture, I think, dear colleagues, we have to be aware that the whole world is listening to European music, is reading our literature. Europe is the leading cultural continent on this world. And Europe provides cultural diversity instead of the commercial mismatch from Hollywood. The question, dear friends, is now, how can we protect this? How can we bring this in a globalized and a digital world? And probably the idea of Emmanuel Macron to create a European Netflix, to bring all our cultural heritage in one digital form together with free access to everybody, could be a good idea for this. It's either a Europe sticking to the cultural richness or not a Europe at all. Dear colleagues, there are a lot of things to do, but having our fundamental ideas for the European Union in mind, our founding fathers were always aware, de Gasperi, Kohl and others, that the European integration was always ambitious, it was always concrete in the projects, and that's why we have to look for these concrete projects for the next days and weeks and years. Let's get things done. It's either an ambitious Europe or it's not a Europe at all. Thanks so much.
A nome del Gruppo Socialista.
On behalf of the Socialist Group, Jeppe Kofod has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you so much, Taoiseach Varadkar, for an excellent speech, for your commitment to Europe, for commitment to cooperation. I think the European Union is the foundation of our prosperity, our security in Europe. Ireland and my own country, Denmark, share similar history, as you know. We joined the European community at the same time, January 1st, 1973, 45 years ago today. Both of our countries have seen tremendous changes. We have benefited from the single market, from the wealth of trade agreements with third countries, from EU funding and cooperation throughout the history. But for us, also as socialists and democrats, Europe is much more than trade and profits. It's about solidarity, it's about prosperity of our people, it's about protecting strong welfare states where nobody of our citizens is left behind. Solidarity is the future of Europe, working together, helping each other to overcome the shared challenges in the 21st century. Globalization, climate change, the refugee crisis, all of these we have to face together. Next year, the United Kingdom will leave the European Union. This, of course, will have a special impact on Ireland and the people of Ireland. And let me be absolutely clear, the European Parliament will stand firmly on upholding the Good Friday Agreement and securing peace, cooperation and prosperity throughout the Emerald Isle. It's very important. Solidarity, we also expect, of course, and I need to take the opportunity to take this debate from the Irish government, the same commitment to solidarity, fairness and cooperation on other issues. So when we build a single market in Europe, free flow of capital, goods, services and people, it's also important that we fight tax avoidance and avoidance, protect our tax bases, our welfare states, our people against the tax evasion we see. What we have seen in Europe, and I have to also give the example on Ireland, when Apple only pays €50 per €1 million they earn on their profits, it's a disgrace. It's not acceptable. We need to change that behavior. We need to stop the never-ending race to the bottom on corporate taxation. We need to protect our welfare state. We need a common rule book in Europe on corporate taxation, and that's also why I ask you also, Prime Minister, to fight for the common consolidated corporate tax base, creating a tax system in the 21st century that is fair, that serves our state, that serves our citizens. And I also want to say, we share a lot of challenges. We also need to build a Europe, as you said, that will protect the citizens of Europe, the workers. Good, decent work and good salaries are the basis of our societies. And therefore also the social Europe you mentioned is part of that agenda. And we need to see action in that field as well. We also need to see that when we do trade liberalisation, through trade agreements, we ensure that these trade agreements also are followed by our values, our rules on sustainable development, protecting the environment, protecting labour rights, protecting human rights, ensuring that big corporations pay their fair taxes. This is equally important. But building a Europe of the 21st century, we are, as you said, much stronger together than apart. That's true. And you said single market is not just for our citizens if we do not protect our citizens also against, for example, big corporations or people that take advantage of a single market to undermine our societies. It's very important. So, Mr. Prime Minister, I have to commend you for standing up for Europe, but I think we also need to talk about what type of fair Europe we can create for the future. So thank you so much for this, and I look forward to work with you and all others who want to change Europe for the better of the people. Thank you so much.
On behalf of the European Conservatives and Reformist Group, Mr. Van Dalen has the floor.
Voorzitter, dank u wel.
Thank you, President. The future of Europe is the title of this debate. That's rather abstract. We're talking about the future of our citizens, aren't we? Now, of course, it's only logical that the Brexit is at the heart of this. A crisis is being responded to with a desire to press ahead with Europe. I think this will actually have the opposite effect on our citizens. It's true that the most recent Eurobarometer polls show that people are thinking more positively towards Europe, but let's not forget that in every referendum on Europe in recent years, it went wrong for the pro-European camp. Think of the Denmark on the Danish referendum on cooperation and justice, and the constitutional referendum in the Netherlands, or the one on Ukraine, and Brexit in the UK. I think what we need, President, is for our citizens to see something that actually works in the EU. We brought in the euro on the basis of the Stability and Growth Pact and the Growth criteria. Now we're all pouring through each other's budget proposals in detail as a guarantee for structural reform, which has been sorely lacking in France for years now. And then you have a Eurozone budget, and you want Euro bonds. Well, this will be another way of showing Dutch citizens that this is not for them, and that there will be an even lower turnout at the elections. We have to stick to our agreements with one another. You're losing the citizens' trust in this way. What they want is real solidarity and real palpable help. Now, on behalf of the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats in Europe, Guy Verhofstadt.
Taoiseach, I think that our European Union can learn a lot from Ireland. And when I'm saying that, I'm not talking about the weather forecasts, naturally. I'm talking about what I call the capacity, the Irish capacity to transform, to reinvent itself, as happened the last decades. And I think that's exactly what we need in Europe today, this capacity to transform ourselves and to reinvent ourselves, and not to destroy ourselves, as some of our colleagues want. 30 years ago, Ireland was a very different country. I think only 7% was born abroad. Today, that's more than 70%. I think that Ireland has become today one of the most diverse nations of the European Union. And the Irish economy has been successfully integrated migrants from over the world, from Poland, from Nigeria. And Ireland has become also the home country for a number of big companies, international IT giants. And Ireland is today, let me say that way, not longer a country of emigration. It has become a country, I should say, of destination, and also a country with a lot of pro-European, sometimes very critical, but always constructive, and that is absolutely key. So what I hope to see, Taoiseach, is in this debate in Ireland that can show the same European leadership as happened in the past. Let me remind that in 1985, 1986, it was Gerald Fitzgerald, your predecessor, who gave the final support to the Single European Act. And it was a crucial support because it was the first time that Ireland broke away from the British position and gave the possibility to push forward the European agenda. And it is the Single European Act, dear colleagues, that later resulted in the single market. And that is now seen and has been seen as the biggest European achievement. Even Margaret Thatcher found it the biggest European achievement of European politics. And the same happened in 2004 and 2007. After the enlargement of the European Union, it was Ireland who championed, in fact, the freedom of movement of all people in the European Union, also of the Polish plumber, also of the Romanian doctor. And so what I hope, Taoiseach, is that Ireland continues to have such a commitment to reform the European Union now. Your voice is critical in this debate. And I see 4 things to do. The first is the new governance for the Eurozone. The second is the European Defence Union. The third is the new European asylum and migration policy. We get to get rid of Dublin. Not of the city of Joyce, naturally. Yeah? I mean the Dublin migration regulation. And we need to have something completely different where not Italy and Greece took all the burden. And we need, finally, I think also a deep democratic reform with a transnational democracy. And I thank you for your support for that important reform that I hope in the coming weeks we can achieve. And lastly, and the President of the Commission is right, we need a budget that goes in parallel with this. It's impossible to say to the citizens, look, citizens, you're right, we need more this, we need more that, we need more European action, but at the same time not to give the necessary instruments and the necessary budget. And finally, President, I think there is a new generation of politicians in Europe that is standing up. And you have to know one thing, that is the last thing what I'm going to say, and it's on Brexit. Whatever stance you will take, Taoiseach, Europe will always be behind you. We know what is at stake in this Brexit negotiation. We know how existential it is for you. Well, know that we will always be behind you. In these negotiations, we are all Irish. You have to know that.
Grazie, onorevole Verhofstadt. Ora per il gruppo.
Thank you. Now for the Federal Group of the European United Left, Nordic Green Left, the floor is for Mrs. Zimmer.
Taoiseach, you're very welcome to our debate here in the European Parliament. At the very latest, since Brexit, we are looking at the impact that this will have for people, not just in the United Kingdom, but also on the island of Ireland and throughout the European Union. There can be no backsliding to a hard border within the European Union. We will stand firm against such a trend. My group will do its utmost to ensure that the Good Friday Agreement in all its parts is protected. I believe that we need to ensure solidarity in Europe. Now, we do need to look beyond Brexit and negotiations on Brexit. We need to look at the European Union as it stands, its treaties, institutions, and the question arises as to whether it's suitable to offer hope to people on solidarity and the fight against climate change. Can we deliver on those hopes? In my group, we have huge doubts as to whether things can work in the current state of affairs. We know how many challenges face the European Union, and let me say here that it is important that we look at combat inequalities between member states and fight against such inequality between different groups within our population. We need to root out inequality and extreme poverty. We need to ensure governance within the European Union. I get the impression that in some key areas where key decisions are required, the European Union is not in a position to take action when it comes to migration, social inequality and the fight against tax havens. And there is also a legitimacy crisis within the European Union. You said that we need to put the focus back on European citizens. Yes, but then we need the right tools, the appropriate instruments and rights for citizens. They should be at the heart and focus of all our discussions on the future of the European Union. They need to help shape the European Union. It cannot be changed from top down. We need a root and branch reform and we need to consider treaty amendments, and I would call on you to offer appropriate support to that end.
Grazie, onorevole Zimmer. Ora per il gruppo Verde.
Thank you. I'll now give the floor to Mr. Lambert for the Green Group.
It's a real pleasure to welcome you here. You've demonstrated again in your speech the depth of your country's and your own commitment to the European project. We all got familiar with your name at the occasion of the Brexit debate, and Ireland is obviously the member state that will be most affected by it, not just for economic reasons, but because this is about peace on the island. Let me just say this: we are at your side on this. Letting violence erupt again in Ireland would not just spell disaster for the concerned communities, but it would be an arrow through Europe's heart, because the European Union is and remains a peace project. Brexit is a challenge we could have avoided, but it should not detract us from those challenges that are existential to the future of Europe. And allow me, Taoiseach, to mention two of them that I find particularly relevant to Ireland. First, our societies will need to find ways to live within the biophysical constraints that nature sets us. There's simply no way around it. And Europe has a choice here: either to become leaders in the ecological transition of our societies, thereby becoming solution providers to the rest of the world, or to stick with the past, thereby becoming solution takers from the rest of the world. From a young entrepreneurial prime minister such as you, I would expect the first option. Yet, Taoiseach, your government has been sorely lacking ambition on tackling climate change. You said when you became prime minister that climate action would be your first priority, yet it doesn't really show. This year, Ireland was ranked as Europe's worst performer in tackling climate change. It's one of only 2 countries in the EU that will miss its 2020 emission reduction targets. And now your government seeks special deals and exemptions from quite modest 2030 targets. On a similar line, Prime Minister, your government opposes the waste reduction bill proposed by the Irish Greens, which aims just at bringing your country on a par with the best practices across Europe on the way to a more circular economy. Come on, Taoiseach, with its abundant resources of renewable energy, Ireland has the potential to be a pioneer in the green transformation. Your countries and Europe's prosperity depend on it. You will hardly be surprised by the second topic that I want to raise, which is, of course, taxation. If we want our single market and single currency to thrive and to deliver benefits to all and not just the richest, we need to stop this race to the bottom on taxation and on social protection. And you know that Ireland often comes to the fore as a tax haven for corporates. Of course, you would argue, and I would agree with you, that several member states offer real taxation rates to multinationals that are way lower than the Irish nominal 12.5%. And you would say that Ireland should be allowed to find ways to make up for a geographical disadvantage. I agree with all of this. But surely the alternative cannot be between a one-size-fits-all taxation system that would work for the central, big and core European countries to the detriment of everyone else, and a no-holds-barred tax competition that we have right now. And instead of playing the holdout, instead of fighting European Commission decisions in court, I would expect Ireland to be at the core of efforts to better cooperate on tax matters in order to give tax justice a chance in Europe. It is not just our excessive ecological footprint, but also ballooning inequalities that threaten the very existence of our civilized societies. Taoiseach, the European project is about establishing a lasting peace on our continent through shared prosperity on the one hand, and on the other through anchoring our societies in the values of freedom, democracy and human rights. And I'm very glad that your government wants to ensure the right of women to control their own bodies. I hope that the upcoming referendum will allow your country to make progress in that direction at a time where we see progress in the other direction in too many parts of Europe. Taoiseach, if you can deploy the same leadership on the ecological transition and on tax justice that the one that you deploy here, you will have done a lot for the European Union. I'm sure you can do it. Thank you.
A nome del Gruppo Europa della Libertà.
From the EFDD group, Mr. Farage.
Thank you. Well, Mr. Varadkar, you are very popular here. A standing ovation from left and centre and right. Mr. Juncker looking joyous. In fact, this European project could have no greater, stronger devotee for a militarised, expansionist United States of Europe. You, of course, worked here as a young man. You're a devotee. In fact, we should call you, I think, a European Unionist, whatever the cost to Ireland may be. Normally, of course, small countries count for nothing here. It's run by the big boys, but right at the minute, you're important and you're useful because you've helped with the obstructionism and the delay of Brexit. Firstly, on the Good Friday Agreement, where, as you know, the European Union had little or nothing to do with it. They were written in at a later stage, but of course, as everyone knows, nothing binds either side to continued membership of the Union, and you know the UK government intends to fully uphold it. The border issue has been put up as a problem, but I think your predecessor, Bertie Ahern, has said, look, in practical terms, we don't face a problem. There's been a common travel area between us, of course, for decades. But it is on trade where that border could, in some ways, be challenged. And of course, when you think that nearly 50% of exports from Irish-owned companies go to the United Kingdom, and agriculture in some sectors it's as high as 90%, you potentially have quite a lot to lose. And yet, despite the fact that no one should be fighting harder for a genuine rounded trade deal than you, that doesn't appear to be the case. In fact, I'd even go further and say that if there was no trade deal between the European Union and the United Kingdom, an exception should be made for Ireland because of political sensitivity. And it's something that the World Trade Organization, I have no doubt, would back up. And yet it seems to me that you're prepared to put your devotion to the European project above the interest of Irish farmers and other companies too. And I wonder why. Well, let's cast our minds back a short distance. The rejection of the Lisbon Treaty by the Irish, a second referendum forced on their people, conducted on the most unfair, undemocratic lines that I have ever seen. You are part, of course, of a big attempt, here and elsewhere, to frustrate and to attempt to overturn Brexit. You don't want Britain to leave because you know if they do, others will leave too. And I would just say this to you. I don't want a second referendum on Brexit, absolutely not. But I fear that you are all working together with Tony Blair and Nick Clegg to make sure we get the worst possible deal. I say that because I've seen it all before. The difference is, if you force the Brits to do it again, there'll be a different outcome. Yeah. Well said.
Thank you. For the Europe of Nations and Freedom group, Mr. de Graaf.
President, let me give you a scenario that's not in the white book of Mr. Juncker. When the EU continues on its present course, the future of Europe will be Islamic. That is the objective of the Islamic world, and that is the objective of the EU elite. It is the aim of the open border policy, and it's the aim of this criminal mass immigration. Of course, there are casualties of abuse, murder and rape. That's the price to pay for the extermination of national identities. That is deliberate EU policy. There's only one obstacle on the road to the European caliphate, and that are the patriotic citizens who vote for patriotic parties. The EU has declared these parties their enemies, their biggest threat. In the EU, the rule of law doesn't apply to patriots. They are homo sacer. The future of Europe is the caliphate unless the citizens rise and defend their culture and identity.
Alla parola l'onorevole Dodds.
Next, Ms Dodds, non-attached.
Mr. President, Taoiseach, thank you for your vision of the future of Europe. Obviously, it is a future with the United Kingdom outside of these institutions, but an important partner in trade, security, research and many other areas. As in the relationship between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, that future should be characterised by close links, shared values and cooperation. The outcome of Brexit on the ties between our two countries will serve as a wider test of the credentials of any deal reached between the United Kingdom and the European Union. You have rightly stressed that there should be no hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. We agree. But Mr Varadkar, I hope you recognise that it is not in the Irish Republic's interest to see Northern Ireland suffer. That would be the case if barriers were erected within the United Kingdom internal market, disrupting almost 60% of local sales that go to Great Britain. The union that matters most to Northern Ireland, both constitutionally and economically, is within the United Kingdom. In focusing on the border, Mr Varadkar, you must not forget the pre-existing relationships, east and west, that are of vital importance to both of our countries. 2018 will be a pivotal year for relationships between the European Union and the United Kingdom, between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. I hope that we can continue to build that positive future which is vital for peace, security and economic prosperity.
Taoiseach, you have the floor for the first answers.
Thank you very much. I've written down a few notes. I mightn't be able to answer everyone, but I'll do my best to touch on as many topics as I can. And first of all, just want to particularly thank almost all the speakers here today for their ongoing support and solidarity with Ireland. That's very much recognised, and we're very grateful for that. I think Mrs Zimmer spoke about the need to reduce inequality among member states, and I think that's something that I can very much sign up to as well. It's a long time since enlargement, and there is still a huge gap in prosperity between Western Europe on the one hand and the countries of Central and Eastern Europe on the other. And I think that's why it's so important that the next MFF, the next European budget, contains in it adequate funding to continue to improve the infrastructure in Central and Eastern Europe and also to support the common agricultural policy. And I think it's why it's so important as well, as I mentioned in my speech earlier, that we put forward a realistic pathway to European membership for the Western Balkans. I think the best way we can stabilise that part of Europe is to give them a pathway towards joining the European Union, those countries that used to be part of Yugoslavia and Albania as well. I think on tax, which I know is an issue of contention between many people in this chamber and Ireland, the view that we take as a government, and I think it's shared by a lot of governments in fact, is that national taxes should fund national budgets, and that is therefore a national competence and a matter of national sovereignty. We do have European taxes at the moment that fund European budget, or at least in part fund the European budget. We have that with customs, we have that with an element of VAT, and that's something that I'm not opposed to at all. And if you look at the model that exists in the United States, which is a federation, after all, there is a lot of tax competition between member states. There are federal income taxes and there are state income taxes, there are different sales taxes in different member states. So if the United States, the most successful economy in the world, can have tax competition among member states, why can't we have the same? And as I said, we have a number of federal taxes already, or European taxes already, that fund the EU budget, and that's something that that I think works quite well. In terms of the Apple case, I think it's important not to forget that it is a state aid case. Technically, it's not a tax case; it's a state aid case, and the contention is that Ireland had a special deal with one particular company, and quite frankly, we didn't, and that is why that case is being appealed both by Apple and by the Irish government. And ultimately, the European courts and the European Court of Justice will make a judgment on that. And whatever that judgment is, our government will accept. We're establishing an escrow account. We will collect the money in Q2 of this year, or at least start collecting it in Q2 of this year. And the money will be held in the escrow account until that decision is made by the European Court of Justice. But it is our contention and it is our belief that we did not have a special arrangement with that company. And we can't say that we did when we know that we didn't. But ultimately, that's going to be a matter for those courts to decide. But what I do want to say is that Ireland is not a tax haven. We don't want to be a tax haven. And we certainly don't want to be seen or perceived as a tax haven. And we have no interest, in fact, in a race to the bottom. Our low corporation tax rate, 12.5%. It's been around for 20 or 30 years now. We haven't increased it. We haven't reduced it. We've just kept it exactly as it is now. And Ireland won't win a race to the bottom. It's already the case that a number of countries have a lower tax rate for corporations than we do. Hungary and Bulgaria, just to give two examples. So if this is a race to the bottom, it's not one that Ireland is going to win. And then, as was mentioned by other speakers, countries like France, just to use one example, have a high corporation profit tax on paper, but have so many exemptions and so many different ways not to pay your tax that, according to the OECD, their effective tax rate is actually lower than ours. So if it's a race to the bottom, it's not one that Ireland is going to win, and therefore not one that we want to participate on. The future of our economy and the future of our prosperity is going to be much more about human capital and attracting talent and people than attracting companies based on corporate tax rate. And we've already made a number of big changes to our tax policy. We've abolished the double Irish, got rid of stateless corporations. We've started taxing intellectual property again just this year. And we'll continue to make steps in those directions and close loopholes. But we want other countries to do that as well, quite frankly. And there's a bit of hypocrisy about that when you look at the amount of money that we actually collect in terms of corporate taxes versus other countries who collect so much less, but yet on paper have a higher tax rate. And I think that needs to be challenged. And it's also very much my strong contention that the progress that we make on this should be done on an international level through the OECD process. And I say that for a very obvious reason, that Europeans shouldn't do something unilaterally that only causes other countries that are not part of the European Union to gain an advantage over us, whether it's the United States, whether it's Japan, or whether it's the United Kingdom, which of course is going to leave. And we need to bear that in mind in anything that we do. On climate change, Ireland is somewhat unusual to other countries in that a huge amount of our greenhouse gas emissions come from agriculture. And that's because we've never really had heavy industry. We never had those big heavy industries that other countries have decommissioned and shut down and achieved their targets in that way. That's not something we can do. But as far as I'm concerned, we are a laggard. I'm not proud of Ireland's performance on climate change. We need to do a lot more. And one of the things my government will do in the next few months is publish our 10-year investment plan, our capital investment plan for Ireland over the next 10 years. And central to that will be the kind of things that we want to do around climate change to make sure we meet those targets in 2030. And that includes things in transport like electrifying our railways. We only have one small part of our railway that's electrified. It's about transitioning our public transport and our bus fleet to low emissions. It's about electric cars in particular, where we put in some incentives, but they haven't got the results that we've liked. And there's lots of things that we intend to do so that we can meet those targets. And it's something that I'm very committed to, and certainly my generation of politicians is very committed to. It makes sense. It's not just the right thing to do, it makes sense economically, I think, in the longer term as well. In terms of the contribution of Mrs. Dodds, which I very much welcome, certainly I have no wish to see any borders between Northern Ireland and Ireland. And I also have no wish to see any new borders or barriers between Britain and Ireland or between Northern Ireland and Britain. That's why I didn't want Brexit, because I don't want any borders. And certainly we'll do everything we can to avoid any of that taking place. And I know what you said, and I understand what you said, that the union that is most important for you is the United Kingdom, and the single market that is most important to you is the single market of the United Kingdom. And 70% of trade between Northern Ireland is with the rest of the United Kingdom. I acknowledge that. But it shouldn't be a choice between the 70% and the 30%. Why not take the 100%? And it is possible to have special arrangements for Northern Ireland, if needs be, that allows Northern Ireland to have that because of its unique situation. And I think that's something that I will work for, and something that I hope that politicians from all sides of Northern Ireland will be open to. If 100% is possible, take that, not 70 instead of 30. And I hope it's possible to, for us to have that discussion a little bit more in the future. Just in relation to Mr. Farage's contribution, I just as a matter of information, I've never worked here, by the way. I've worked in Ireland and the United States. I've never worked in Europe or for a European institution. But in relation to small countries, I really have to disagree, because I experienced that in a very, very personal way, not just in relation to the support that we've received on Brexit from the European institutions, but also when, for the first time, I attended a European Council meeting, the meeting of the Prime Ministers and Presidents of Europe. And it's a really interesting and humbling experience to get to do that. And I know some of you who've been Prime Ministers will have had that experience, because Council of Ministers is very different. You go into this massive room, you sit there, the ambassador sits beside you, you have 6 officials behind you, and it's a very different experience when you go into the Council of Ministers. And I went into the Council of Ministers for the first time last year. I sat around the table, there were no officials there, the only people there were the President of the Council, the President of the Commission, and the heads of government of 26, 27 or 28 member states. And I come from a country that is only 4.5 million people. We're a small country. There are many provinces, even cities in other European countries that have more people than mine and have a bigger economy of mine. And I was sitting around the table as an equal with the President of France, the Chancellor of Germany, the Prime Minister of Spain, the Prime Minister of Italy, these really big countries. And that isn't the way Europe used to work. Before the European Union, the big countries would get together, they decide what is right for Europe, and they tell the rest of us. That doesn't happen anymore because of the European Council. And because of these European institutions. And I'm not so naive as to think that a country like Ireland, with 4.5 million people, can ever have the power or importance of a country like Germany with 80 million and its massive economy. But what the European Union allows us to do is it allows small countries to have a seat at the table when decisions are made, as opposed to having no say at all. And that's why I believe small countries are so much better off to be in this union. But finally, just in relation to Britain, and I want to say that Britain is a country that I care a lot about. Irish people are very close to British people in so many ways, even though sometimes we don't like to admit that. In so many ways, we have a shared culture and a shared history. And that's very much the experience of my family as well. My parents met and fell in love and got married in England. She's an Irish nurse, he's a doctor from India. They both went to Britain to build a new life, and that's where they met, that's where they married, that's where they fell in love. That's where my sister was born, and she still lives there in London with my niece and nephew, who are English kids. They point up at the Union Jack and they say, "Leo, that's our flag." And that's how close Irish people, in many ways, are to British people. We're connected by blood in so many different ways. And that's why I really regret the decision that has been made on Brexit, because so much will be lost. Young people will lose the right to live, work and study anywhere in the European Union, losing those rights as European citizens. My niece and nephew won't because they're entitled to Irish passports, but the other kids in their class will, and I think that's a real shame. British businesses could lose their access. British businesses could lose their access to the biggest market in the world. Farmers, food producers, even the beer makers that you and I are so fond of could lose the subsidies that they currently benefit from, which are not guaranteed beyond this Parliament. And also, I'm conscious as well of British veterans, very brave people who fought on the beaches of France, not just for Britain, but also for European democracy and for European values. And people like that are always in my mind. So notwithstanding the decision to leave, and I respect that decision, I will absolutely fight hard to ensure that we can have as close as possible partnership and as close a possible relationship between the UK and the EU. It's in Ireland's interests. I think it's in the interests of British people, and it's in the interests of the European Union as well. I think we should conclude a new partnership and a new agreement with the UK. But fundamentally, what we have to move away from is any idea that any country can have a relationship that involves taking all the benefits and none of the responsibilities and obligations. And that's the fundamental thing that we need to insist on.
We now move to Catch the Eye. I would ask all members please to respect the 1 minute speaking time which you have. In the knowledge that there is voting at noon, 12:30. First is Mr. Kelly.
Thank you very much, and as head of Fine Gael in the Parliament, I would like to welcome our Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar, here today, and I would like to congratulate him for the wonderful speech that he made, and also the other leaders for giving us this opportunity to get together and have this discussion here today on the future of Europe.
But that's dealt with, so there's no need to repeat it, even though we have a vote shortly on the renewable energy file, which I'm honoured to be a rapporteur for. My question to him is very simple. He spoke about Ireland being one of the most prosperous countries in Europe right now, but unfortunately we have a history of going from boom to bust and bust to boom. What can he do as a result of the prosperity we now enjoy, due to good leadership by him and his predecessor and cooperation with the European Union, to ensure we don't go into a bust situation again, and in particularly avoid auction politics at general elections, which has often been the root cause of this?
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you again, Mr. Taoiseach, and we're proud of you.
Ms. Childers.
Thank you, Chair. Taoiseach, I must start by thanking you for your continued efforts and commitment to preserve the peace process and to prevent the formation of barriers within the island of Ireland on foot of the UK's decision to withdraw from the Union. However, I do not share your ideology in other ways, so I must also follow that with a plea to you as Taoiseach of Ireland and as a member of the European political force whose worldview and power has most considerably shaped both the emergence of the financial and economic crisis a decade ago and the measures taken in response to it since. That plea is that you work to mend the frayed social contract that can bind together our communities at national and European level. Just as the conflict in the north of Ireland hid inequality and deprivation of basic rights under a cloak of ethno-religious hatred, so today the march of disillusioned citizens draws much energy from the losers of globalisation and the losers of our response to a crisis of globalisation. We saved finance and strived for a return to the status quo ante in a transfer of wealth without precedent. And I agree with MEP Kofod's view of our corporate taxation regime. Fair taxation, even a modicum of taxation in some cases, might just help us to do what I've already suggested and, who knows, make the case for the retrospective bank recapitalisation that we never saw. Thank you.
That was almost twice the speaking time you had. That's taken off your colleagues, I'm afraid. Mr. Marias. Thank you very much, President. The future of the European Union is closely bound up with the need for thoroughgoing changes in the Eurozone. We must see an end to the draconian stability system. And we need the European system of central banks must be further decentralized rather than centralized in the European Central Bank. We have to have monetary, economic and monetary authority so that the national central banks can have a policy which is driven by local circumstances in individual member states. And this is very important. Structural changes must be accompanied by transparency and accountability for the European Central Bank, with a beefing up of the powers and prerogatives of the European Parliament and national parliaments. And we need to see an increase in the budget of the European Union. Thank you very much.
Harkin.
Ms. Harkin.
Morning, Taoiseach, and welcome. And I see you brought the snow with you. Three things. This morning you spoke of direct democracy. You said it was one of our 4 challenges. You supported an EU-wide list and the Spritzen candidate. But Taoiseach, that's representative democracy, not direct democracy. Direct democracy is something like the Citizens' Initiative, where 1 million citizens from 7 member states call on the EU to act. So will you support real direct democracy? Secondly, you spoke of Ireland's commitment to PESCO. You said that we won't be part of a single European defence budget. But do you envisage that the commitment we have made will mean increased defence and security spending in Ireland? Finally, tax justice. You said twice this morning the EU cannot act unilaterally, but the EU often acts unilaterally in trying to shape global policy. So do you see Ireland as having any role in shaping this policy where all citizens and multinationals pay their fair share of tax?
Honourable Anderson.
Ms. Anderson.
Anderson.
Bolsha Taoiseach, today's uncertain present will shape the future of the EU. Brexit threatens to rip our island apart, dilute rights and freedoms we all enjoy, and stunt the economic and social development of our island. It threatens to harden the border, reinforce partition and undermine the Good Friday Agreement. So therefore I welcome your comments today about a special arrangement for the North being possible. Sinn Féin MEPs Leonie Rita, Lynn Boylan, Matt Carthy and I also welcome your comments that the people of the North will never again be left behind by the Irish Government. You must hold firm to this Taoiseach. You must also commit to a Europe that serves people, not multinationals. The civil, workers, European, environmental, linguistic and human rights of all citizens needs to be protected and indeed enhanced. They won't be achieved by a non-compassionate, faceless Europe. It won't be achieved in a Europe where the gap between the rich and the poor grows, or in a Europe of homelessness and housing waiting list, and it certainly won't be achieved in PESCO and in any manifestation of an aggressive militaristic Europe. Go míle maith agaibh. Thank you.
Honourable Solé.
Mr. Solé.
Thank you, President. Taoiseach, as we discuss with you the future of Europe, a future which I firmly believe must be based on more and stronger political integration in a number of areas, the Catalan Parliament is meeting for the first time again with a majority of members in favour of the Catalan Republic. But 8 members of this newly elected parliament cannot be there right now sitting in the Catalan chamber because they are whether in jail or in exile. So the question is, do you envisage a European Union where honest politicians can be sent into exile or must be forced into jail because they fulfilled a democratic mandate? Do you envisage a European Union where, again, peaceful people are beaten by police forces just because they want to vote, they want to exercise a basic right? Do you envisage a European Union that looks the other way when it comes to democracy and basic rights within its borders? Thank you.
Mr. Gyurk, please.
Honourable Gyurk. Honourable Rangel.
Mr. Rangel.
Mr. Prime Minister, thank you very much for such an inspiring and positive contribution. As far as I have understood, you consider and even appreciate the creation of a transnational list and a single European constituency. As a true federalist and European, it is apparently a romantic and a generous idea, but it threatens a very delicate compromise among European member states. Let me put you 3 short questions, only to stimulate your reflection on this issue. Are you aware that the United States, Switzerland and Germany, that are true and historic federations, they don't have a single national constituency? Are we more papists than the Pope? They are true successful histories of integration. Are you aware that this will reinforce the weight of the big states? Because it's natural that in the first places of each list there will be nationals from the bigger states. And this will jeopardize the position of Ireland and Portugal. You should reflect on this. Thank you very much. No, you don't.
Honourable Bresso.
Mrs. Bresso. Thank you, President. Might I begin, Taoiseach, by thanking you for your intervention today and to reply to what Mr. Rangel said. It's not going to be transnational lists in Europe. The important thing is to respect the difference between big, small and medium countries. And I would thank you for your speech this morning. We're here to have a discussion and a debate in the chamber. Thank you for your address. And I'd like to repeat matters which have been raised with you: greater democratic, more democracy in the European Union and the institutions, more equivalence between the Parliament and the Council, Parliament becoming a real European Senate with majority voting to get real, clear transparency at the European level. If we look at the future evolution of Europe, it must guarantee understandability, readability, greater transparency, more democracy in the system. And I believe that the institutional aspects are every bit as important as the economic dimension, which others have alluded to. Thank you very much.
You have the floor.
Thank you very much indeed, President. Taoiseach, you are very welcome here in the European Parliament today. Your visit is rather timely, given that we have just reached agreement in phase 1 of the Brexit negotiations, and I welcome the fact that you were able to reach agreement on that phase 1 and can proceed to talking about the future relationship within the European Union. I do not want to return to the borders of the past or the divisions of the past. And Mr Lamberts, please do not speak about Northern Ireland ever returning to violence in my presence again, because we're not. I listened to your comments to Mrs Dodds. I was very concerned about Brexit because of those very reasons. And I certainly hope that we can move forward east-west and north-south and equally. And if we can achieve that 100% you speak about, Mr Taoiseach, then I will welcome that. Can I say on a final point, and I hope you'll agree with me, the key to this agreement and to move things forward in Northern Ireland and get Northern Ireland Executive back up and running again at Stormont, that, sir, is the key to the future of Northern Ireland and the future of our relationships within Brexit. Thank you.
Honourable Flanagan.
Mr Flanagan.
Taoiseach,
In 2013, you said not another cent for the banks. Last year, on your watch, our central bank destroyed 4 billion. In the last years, 9.5 billion, at a time when Ireland is suffering unprecedented crisis in housing and in health. This ongoing destruction of billions is the prom note legacy, a direct result of the full bailout of an insolvent Anglo-Irish bank. That bailout at a time of crisis in the EU, a time when Ireland was left isolated in the front line by its so-called friends. So tell me, what do you think happens if there's another crisis in the EU? A crisis, let's say, on the eastern borders. In the banking crisis, the EU institutions thought nothing about bending and breaking the rules. Today you say that PESCO doesn't impact on our neutrality. In the past you said what you said on the banks, but you betrayed us. You will attempt to betray us on our neutrality, but you will not succeed. You will not get away with it. Taoiseach, the future of Europe as currently envisioned is a full federal United States. That is not what we envisioned or looked at when we joined what was a community. You do not have a mandate what you asked for. Listen to the people.
Onorevole Philippot.
Monsieur Philippot. Thank you, Prime Minister. Colleagues, the future of Europe is an essential debate, and we can see that the peoples do not envisage that like the self-proclaimed elites and the European institutions, the machin, the big machine, as General de Gaulle might have said. People say more Europe in religious tones, with its credos and its tenets and its blasphemies and its senior clerics. But that's the last thing citizens want. What they want is democracy first and foremost. Democracy, by definition, is based on the sovereignty of peoples. And you do not create a people by artificially bringing people together under the ferule of nosy, snoopy bureaucracy. The internal market is organised around dog-eat-dog competition for the benefits of some big groups and lobbies which are hostile to democracy. You know this in Ireland, as well as anybody else. Living in a free country is priceless. It's a treasure to cherish. You have had your differences with the UK, as have we. But we know that Brexit is the way for the future, for more prosperity, and particularly for the liberty and sovereignty of our peoples. Thank you.
Le Breton, vous avez la parole.
Monsieur Le Breton.
Okay. Merci, Monsieur le Président. En mars.
Thank you, President. In March 2017, the European Commission published a white paper on the future of Europe, and there are a number of scenarios there, from just a single market through to an omnipotent broad market. It looks simple, but it isn't. Does Europe wish to go on integrating on an obligatory basis? And setting up a working party on subsidiarity that Mr. Juncker just referred to is just a subterfuge, really. Brexit should have encouraged the Union to ask itself searching questions. There are peoples in the European Union who no longer want to know about an authoritarian, arrogant and pro-immigration EU. If we want to retain an intelligent way of cooperating in Europe, we need to rethink about and reinvent the EU. We need to bring back sovereignty and replace the EU by a union of European nations.
Ms. McGuinness.
Thank you, President, and welcome, Taoiseach, to the Parliament. There are many voices and views, as you've already heard. I'm responsible for dialogue with national parliaments, and I think it's something we need to do better. What are your thoughts about how the European Parliament and national parliaments operate, and would you have any guidance or advice for us? I have to say, you've set a high standard for those who come after you, and that's excellent, not just because you're Irish, but because it's an important debate. You were disarmingly honest in relation to climate and the actions in Ireland, and we hope and we want to make progress, but equally frank about where taxation needs to be dealt with
and that is at the OECD level. I think, Mr. President, you also are to be congratulated for this initiative. It's a good start to our work here in January that we have the opportunity to have an open and frank debate with the leader of my country, Taoiseach Leo Varadkar, and that process will continue. So let's make it beneficial.
Honourable Dance.
Mr. Dance.
Honourable Dance.
Seb Dance.
Thank you, Taoiseach, for your speech. I too, like your nephew and niece, was born European, and you very kindly mentioned the city, the one world city that will be leaving the European Union. Of course, there are people up and down the breadth of the United Kingdom who are fighting Brexit, who are campaigning in towns and cities across the country, so don't count us out yet. As Farage has said, this issue is not settled. And how dare Mr. Farage say that the European Union had nothing to do with the peace process? I worked in the Northern Ireland office under the last government. I sat in the meetings with the victims, the families of the victims of the Omagh bombing. And what I witnessed was their incredible dignity, that they did not have anger, they did not have hatred, just a sense that no one should ever go through this again. And it was not the common travel area that got rid of the checks on the border. It was the creation of the single market. It was the creation of free movement. It was the values espoused in this place and put into action that removed those barriers. We should never forget that. And a warning, there are people who just want Brexit at any cost. They will try and undo what was agreed in phase one. Let's not let them do it.
Honourable McAllister.
Mr. McAllister.
McAllister. McAllister, please. Okay, Mr. Peterle.
Mr. Peterle.
Peterle.
Here.
Yes.
Mr. Taoiseach, more than 1,000 years ago, Irish monks reached Slovenians and other peoples in Central Europe. Today, you are the first Prime Minister to speak about the future of Europe in the European Parliament. My congratulations to your and Ireland's strong European spirit. You used three keywords, in my opinion: heart, soul and citizens. We can do progress only if the European project is supported by European citizens in all member states. Mr. Prime Minister, we can agree on many concrete projects, but first of all, we need a strong and uniting European narrative. What could, in your opinion, inspire and motivate European citizens for more Europe? My remark to Brexit: I don't believe in this expensive and hazardous exercise. British citizens decided on the first referendum without knowing consequences. They have a right to know the consequences and to have the chance to decide on the second referendum when they are acquainted with the consequences. Thank you very much.
Honourable Ana Gomes.
Ana Gomes.
Thank you for your enlightened words for Europe. As a child of a migrant, what do you tell citizens and European leaders about the rejuvenation, regeneration that migrants actually bring to Europe? How do you press with the EU Council the importance of full social integration for migrants and for refugees and their children? On taxation, you said that you want a single market that serves citizens and not just corporations, and you said that you want corporations that they should pay their fair share of taxes and that countries should not be played off against each other. So are you in favour of a common corporate consolidated tax base in the EU so that the race to the bottom does not continue? Will you push at the Council as well for a financial transaction tax so that capitals are not escaping taxes while citizens and SMEs are overburdened, and so that indeed we will have a level playing field in the single market and that we ensure that our own resources for the EU and from member states will indeed increase?
L'ultimo speaker è l'onorevole De Lange.
Last speaker, Drangan.
Very much, Mr. President, and I apologise, colleagues, for the state of my voice. Maybe a good Irish whiskey would help. At the end of this debate, I would like to thank the Prime Minister for honouring the past, but looking towards the future. I think this is exactly what Europe needs right now. And sometimes the current situation in Europe reminds me of that famous poem The Second Coming by the great Irish poet Yeats, in which he describes a falcon moving further and further away from the falconer until he can no longer hear him. And then comes the famous line by Yeats, "Things fall apart, the centre cannot hold." And these centrifugal forces are, of course, also at play in the EU, culminating in Brexit, which will impact your country, I'm aware of that, which will impact my country, the Netherlands, and we should limit that impact as far as we can. But this, and I'm glad it wasn't a debate about Brexit, it was a debate about the future. It was a debate about making the centre hold on those issues where we stand no chance to defend our values and our interests alone. And by only acting alone, you've said it, by only flying a national flag, we will in the end all be small member states. Thank you for your outstretched hands. We in the European Parliament will gladly take it. Thank you very much.
Taoiseach, you have the floor for...
Taoiseach, you have the floor for the conclusion.
Thank you again for your interesting questions and your contributions. I was asked how we can avoid boom and bust again. I think it's really two things. First of all, ensuring that we don't have credit bubbles again in Europe, and the European Central Bank is best placed to do that. And it's also around fiscal policy, balancing the books. For the first year in 10 years, Ireland will not have a budget deficit this year. It's reducing our debt so that we can ensure that we have the capacity to borrow again in future if we need to. And it's also setting up a rainy day fund, which we have set up, to put some of our budget surplus into to prepare for a future downturn, which inevitably happens at some point. MEP Childers asked about the social contract and social Europe, and I think the best thing we can do to put fire back into the engine of social Europe is to build on what was agreed in Gothenburg. I think we actually agreed a really good political statement in Gothenburg, and I'd like to see us turn that into reality by using that protocol, that proclamation, to guide European legislation in those areas in the years to come. And delightfully we're joined by Commissioner Thyssen as well for this particular part of the discussion. I actually, to MEP Harkins, I have to say I like the idea of a citizens' initiative. I think it's a good idea. It would be a good example of direct democracy, but we would have to also have safeguards because 1 million people is a lot, but in a European Union of 500 million, it's also a small minority. So we'd have to make sure that any citizens' initiative was not a loud minority, but actually reflective of a majority view, and that's what representatives best do. To be very frank, it is our intention to increase defence spending. We're not going to increase defence spending to anything like the level that you see in other European countries, but we intend to do it for two reasons. First of all, because a lot of the members of our defence forces, our Air Corps, our soldiers, people in our Navy are quite poorly paid. And we're now restoring and increasing their pay. And of course, that involves an increase in defence spending. And we also need to replace a lot of our out-of-date equipment, our fishery protection vessels, some of our helicopters. So yes, there will be an increase in defence spending, but it's something we would have been doing anyway, even if we were not in PESCO. On Catalonia, and one of my favourite parts of the world, Barcelona is one of my favourite cities, I think the only solution is dialogue. And I hope that the central government in Madrid will engage in dialogue with the new government in Catalonia. Mr Rangel asked me to reflect on a few things in relation to a single European constituency, and I think he does make some good points. That the United States, which is a federation, doesn't have a single constituency for anything. They elect their president, for example, through an electoral college. But perhaps they should have a single constituency, because on 2 occasions out of 4 now, the candidate who got the second amount of votes won the presidency, but that of course is a matter for them. And I'm not entirely sure that transnational lists would necessarily benefit big countries, because I see what's here in front of me, the heads of groups, and I see a number of the people who are heads of their groups are actually from small and medium-sized countries. So why would it not be the case that might also happen on a list? But I think we have an opportunity now. The UK is leaving. there are seats that are free, so it's possible to have a transnational constituency without any individual member state losing any positions. And it gives people 2 votes, 1 vote for their MEP who represents them and their region, and a second vote for a European party, challenging people to think about those ideas. And it is a big challenge, and I imagine a lot of people would cast a blank vote the first time round, but in time I think people would get used to the idea. To MEP Jim Nicholson, I just really want to thank you very much for your constructive comments, and I concur totally with what you said about the new relationship and also the need to get the Executive and Assembly up and running. And the Taoiseach and the Secretary of State have already met on this, and I'll be in touch with the Prime Minister on it as well, and we really want to drive that forward. Finally, Mr Peterle asked about how we can inspire Europeans. And I think perhaps one of the ways we can do that is something I touched on in my speech, which is really to take action in relation to Africa, to make it part of Europe's mission to improve Africa, to stabilise it, to make it prosperous in the way that much of Asia has become prosperous. And that's a way in which I think we can turn a thought into a feeling and really give people in Europe a positive feeling about what Europe can do. So thank you very much again for your contributions. It's been a real pleasure and a real honour to have the opportunity here to speak to the Parliament and to answer some of your questions. Thank you again.
Taoiseach, thank you very much for your participation. Thank you very much for your cooperation with the European Parliament. We will work together for a better Europe. Thank you very much.